Yes, I wrote Money, Possessions, Eternity back in, it actually came out in 1989, so I was researching it in 87 and 88. Finished it in 88, came out in 89, and my desire for that book was to do what Ron alluded to earlier, to kind of have a theology of money. Like, let's take all, or at least most, of the biblical passages that deal with money, and let's actually deal with them and see how they fit together, and the different chapters of that book, or different sections of that book. One of the distinctives of the book was I wanted it to be not just about money, but specifically money from an eternal perspective, and consequently the title, Money, Possessions, Eternity, and a whole section of that book has to do with where we will spend eternity if we know Jesus. So I do talk about heaven, but I talk a lot about eternal reward and living in light of eternity, and there's a chapter called The Pilgrim Mentality, etc. And that book was, to me, a foundational book that came out of my own study, intensive study over a period of years, and I preached some on it as a pastor, that I wanted to put together for those who kind of wanted to get into some biblical meat and some theological sorts of frameworks through which they could kind of have a paradigm that could then help them to be very practical. And there are many practical things in that book. I then later wrote The Treasure Principle, which specifically dealt with giving. Certainly there's some other general stewardship things that connect with it, but most of it. How many of you are familiar with the Treasure Principle? Okay. About 1.7 million copies of that book have been sold. And one of the things that's remarkable about that book is that back in those days when I was writing it, if you would have gone to a publisher and said, okay, what's the next book that's going to sell 1 million copies? And then somebody said, well, how about we come up with a book that's going to encourage people to give their money away? Boy, that'll sell like crazy, you know. No, that's not. And so, but God used that book and as a great surprise. But Money, Possessions, Eternity has remained the kind of the foundational theological work out of which that book came, and this new book, Managing God's Money, that you're all getting, you know, tonight. I'm really excited about that because 20 years ago, David Wills said to me, or probably maybe 18 years ago, a couple years after Money, Possessions, Eternity came out, he said, Randy, you need to take the big Money, Possessions, Eternity, but you need to give us just a small, more closer to a pocketbook type of thing for those that aren't into all of the big study stuff, and give us something that is, you know, the cookies on the lower shelf and on the whole realm of stewardship. And that's what that book is.